For most of the second millennium AD, Central Europe is divided into a patchwork of states. It takes centuries for its people to start to see themselves as German. Who are they? What is their history? Questions about 1,000 years of German history. The Germans still aren't unified in one state. Otto von Bismarck will now set about changing that, not with parliaments, but, as he says, with blood and iron. An empire imposed from above, unity, at the price of freedom? It's not a question he asks himself. Ferdinand Cohen-Blind is a 22-year-old student from southern Germany, and he's in Berlin for one reason only. He wants to prevent the impending war in which there are Germans on both sides, a war between brothers. The enthusiastic patriot feels that those responsible for the threat of civil war are traitors to Germany. In order to maintain peace, Cohen-Blind sees only one solution. He has to remove the man who most Germans see as the driving force behind the looming conflict. And that is the Prussian Prime Minister Otto von Bismarck. He's fighting for the power of the crown over parliament and democracy in Prussia. He is considered a reactionary of the first order. To the outside world, he wants to unite the many German states under Prussian rule, not just out of a national feeling of Germanness, but, as many believe, out of a Prussian thirst for power. His motto, the major questions in history are solved with bayonets, not with words. That now turns against him. Bismarck's study in Friedrichsruh near Hamburg. The memory of the attempted assassination still hangs in the air here. One of the items in Bismarck's estate was the perpetrator's pistol. It's a firearm that could have changed the course of history. As the darned bullet holes reveal, Bismarck was hit several times, but his thick clothing that day dampened the impact, and the gun's firepower was too weak. Bismarck only suffered bruising. What would have happened if the assassination attempt had succeeded?
Had Bismarck fallen victim to an assassination in 1866, then there definitely wouldn't have been war in the way there was. Nobody in Germany wanted the inner German war.
But Bismarck does. He kept the weapon of his attacker, who committed suicide in prison, till the day he died. He sees his salvation as a divine nod to launch the decisive battle for Germany now. Germany at this time is made up of more than 30 independent states that have come together in the German Confederation. The major powers, Austria and Prussia, have the say. But when Prussia seeks to seize control of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein against Austria's wishes, the argument becomes a test of strength. Who has the say in Germany, Austria or Prussia? The decision is made in the free city of Frankfurt. The city where German emperors were once elected is now the seat of the German Confederation, whose purpose is to secure peace among the German states and provide shared external security. Not far from the cathedral, in the Turn- und Taxis Palace, the Confederate Diet, the Confederation's decision-making body, meets a month after the assassination attempt. The motion on the agenda is Austria's request to mobilize against Prussia on the grounds that the occupation of the duchies of Schleswig and Holstein is illegal. All eyes turn to him, the Prussian delegate Karl Friedrich von Savigny. What instructions has he received from Bismarck? The delegate from Austria is chairing the meeting.
Let us vote. In the name of His Majesty, the Emperor of Austria, I vote yes to the motion. And now the delegate from Prussia has the floor.
In the name of the Prussian government, I vehemently protest against this vote, which is undoubtedly in violation of Confederate law.
We register this protest. Next, I call upon the delegate from the Kingdom of Bavaria to speak.
In the name of my government, I support the motion of the Imperial Austrian government.
Prussia is isolated. The princes don't want a German confederation dominated by Prussia.
Württemberg.
In favor.
With 9 votes to 6, the Austrian motion to mobilize the army of the German Confederation against Prussia is accepted.
In the name of His Majesty, the King of Prussia, I inform you that Prussia sees this vote as a declaration of war.
There are shouts of outrageous from the hall.
And secondly, for Prussia, this vote annuls the Confederation Treaty. On my King's orders, I declare my participation in this assembly to be over.
The German Confederation ended in 1866-67 because the states did precisely what it was intended to prevent, namely wage war against each other. But the majority of the states were on the Austrian side, and Prussia was seen as the bad guy who was violating this German Confederation. So they joined forces against Prussia to wage war.
The war starts just 1 day after the vote in Frankfurt, and it's decided at the beginning of July near Königgrätz, in the modern-day Czech Republic, but in those days in Austrian Bohemia. Bismarck has put his hopes in this man, the Prussian Chief of Staff, Helmut von Moltke. His plan is for the Prussian forces to move separately but strike together. He has divided the Prussian forces into 3 armies. They make faster progress separately, but they can only win as one. The 3rd army falls behind. Only if it arrives in time for the battle can Moltke's plan succeed. The 3rd army approaches as fast as it can. It reaches the battlefield at around noon, just in time. The Austrian northern flank is overrun. The Austrians and their allies have no choice. If they want to avoid being surrounded, they have to halt the Prussians with a counterattack. The attack launched by the Austrian reserves is a turning point in the battle. The Prussians can now play their trump card, the Prussian needle gun, the first breech-loading firearm to function properly. The ammunition is loaded at the back rather than being pushed down the muzzle. When the trigger's pulled, a firing pin pierces the cartridge and ignites the charge that propels the bullet forwards. It gives the Prussians a deadly advantage over the Austrians, who are still armed with muzzle loaders. The Prussians can reload more quickly and also while lying down. The soldiers can remain in cover. The Austrian counterattack collapses in the rapid fire from the Prussian needle guns. Thousands die in around half an hour. Their deaths decide the battle. The Austrian army and its allies only narrowly escape complete destruction. By the end of the day, around 15,000 Austrians are either dead or missing. The Prussians only lose around 2,000 men. For the wounded on both sides, the war's over, but not their fear of death. The Red Cross has only been in existence for 2 years. It tries to deal with the suffering on the battlefield as best it can. The Battle of Königgrätz decides the war. Austria is defeated. The government in Vienna has no choice. It sends a peace offer to the Prussian headquarters at Nikolsburg Palace. Austria offers Prussia immediate peace and a free hand in the German Confederation. The only condition is that Austria will cede no territory whatsoever. Bismarck is prepared to accept that, but his king, Wilhelm I of Prussia, isn't.
The Prussian army is winning. Do you expect me to have them stop before they reach Vienna?
We've achieved our goal, Your Majesty. Every further day comes with the danger that Austria receives help. We must make peace now.
Nonsense. We must be able to say in Prussia that we hurt Austria and that we punished it by taking some of its possessions. At least some of Austria must be ours. There are several options. For example, a piece of Austria could become German Bohemia.
Quite impossible, Your Majesty.
Austrian Silesia.
Impossible.
Moravia.
Your Majesty, impossible.
Impossible? I'll tell you what's impossible. Your attitude. Prussia's policies are still made by the king. You may go.
Wilhelm simply thought, if we win a war, we must make territorial gains. We must experience a tangible triumph. Bismarck thought far beyond that. He wanted to go gentle on Austria, so they would have a partner in the future.
Bismarck reacts to the king's resistance with fury. He remembers it even decades later. He finally gives the monarch a choice. If Wilhelm chooses to reject Vienna's offer, he will resign. Only now does the king give in. Austria keeps its territory and quickly makes peace with the victor. And Prussia has achieved its goal. The battle for dominance in Germany has been decided, the way Bismarck intended.
The decision of 1866 made it clear that Germany and Austria would go their separate ways. Contemporaries saw this as grotesque. Austria had been part of Germany for centuries, but now the decision was made to form the German Empire without Austria. From 1866 onwards, Austria's and Germany's paths would separate.
And it was Otto von Bismarck who separated them. The victory over Austria gives the villain the last laugh. His Prussian fatherland feels his victory is worth a monument, the Victory Column in Berlin. To this day, it's the central symbol of Bismarck's unification of Germany. A bronze relief at its base depicts the Battle of Königgrätz. In the middle, the gilded barrels of captured enemy cannon. And at the top, a goddess of victory wearing the Prussian eagle helmet, a symbol of triumph set in stone. Victorious Prussia now rules in Germany. While Austria itself survives, Prussia simply annexes states such as the Kingdom of Hanover that supported Vienna, while joining forces with others to form the North German Confederation. But it only extends to the River Main. Because of a French veto, southern Germany remains independent.
France was against German unification for purely power political reasons. It was the primary power on the continent and felt it would be dangerous to allow Prussia, which was rising rapidly, to triumph again. The French side wanted to keep the German side, and Prussia in particular, in check.
It isn't just France that wants to keep Prussia under control. Many people in southern Germany, especially in Bavaria and Württemberg, want to maintain their old independence, and that's especially true for the rulers. It's only a nudge from the outside that gets things going again. It starts in Sigmaringen in Swabia. This is the home of the Princes of Hohenzollern, a branch of the Prussian royal house. In 1870, the Spanish offer the prince's eldest son, Leopold, the Spanish crown. Leopold hesitates, but then accepts, but not entirely of his own volition, as letters from Bismarck in Sigmaringen's State Archive prove. Leopold only agrees under pressure from Bismarck. Bismarck knows that the French Emperor Napoleon III is against a member of the House of Hohenzollern on the Spanish throne because he fears any further increase in Berlin's power. But Bismarck thinks a conflict with France is almost unavoidable if he wants to unify Germany's north and south. Bismarck uses Leopold to deliberately provoke the French.
The question is this: is the solution of 1866 permanent, or is it a stopgap on the way to a German empire? In Bismarck's view, and it's probably irrefutable, war with France is inevitable if he wants to achieve this.
News of Leopold's acquiescence alarms the French foreign minister, the Duc de Gramont. A Hohenzollern prince on the Spanish throne is irreconcilable with France's power and the prestige of its ruler, Emperor Napoleon III.
Your Majesty.
So it's true. Leopold has ambitions to be king.
Leopold strebt danach, König zu werden.
Sire, if Prussia has another triumph, the French won't be demanding Bismarck's head anymore. They'll want yours.
What do you suggest?
The Prussian king must publicly and permanently revoke Leopold's candidacy.
The king won't simply accept such a humiliation.
He will. Otherwise, we'll force him to.
The man who's going to be forced is currently in Bad Ems to take the waters. It's here that the king, Wilhelm, hears about the French protest and acts as mediator. With his consent, Leopold withdraws his candidacy. France has won. Conflict seems to have been avoided. That's a mistake. Leopold's withdrawal isn't enough for the French emperor. He wants to see Prussia humiliated.
It's a dispatch from the king, and we cannot delay. It seems the French ambassador, Benedetti, visited him personally in Bad Ems this morning.
The king's message to Bismarck says that Benedetti has demanded a public guarantee that no one from the House of Hohenzollern would ascend the Spanish throne. It was a huge affront.
Der König hätte
The
nicht
king
mit ihm
shouldn't
reden.
have spoken to him. Leopold withdrew, and that was enough.
Leopold hat verzichtet, das reicht.
The king has clearly realized his mistake. He sent his secretary to clarify that he's not able or willing to do more.
His Majesty informs you that Leopold's withdrawal has been confirmed to him from Sigmaringen, and he has nothing further to convey to the ambassador.
That's it.
Wait. Everything's not lost yet. We'll shorten the message a little. Voila. We'll cut the bit about Sigmaringen and just say, the king has nothing further to convey to the ambassador. Period.
Excellent. And that gives it quite a different tone. As if the king has slammed the door in his face.
If I pass this on to the papers, Paris will hear about it before midnight. Let's wait and see how France reacts.
Bismarck's plan is successful. Napoleon takes the publication of the so-called Ems telegram as a slap in the face. The man who wanted to humiliate Prussia has now been humiliated himself. He acts just as Bismarck expects. France declares war on Prussia.
Napoleon's hold on France is weakening, and he can't afford a defeat. Bismarck knows that he can't just say, "We'll let it go." A major power like France has to respond. And so France and Prussia are both on the offensive, and they clash.
Both sides are to blame for the conflict, but Bismarck has a crucial advantage. Because France was the one to declare war, it is seen as the aggressor. In Munich and all over southern Germany, even Prussia's rivals now want to join the North German Confederation against France. The public mood leaves southern Germany's rulers no choice. Ludwig II, the King of Bavaria, also orders the mobilization of his army against France. In Bavaria and all across Germany, the people willingly heed the call to arms. Craftsmen, teachers, workers, farm laborers, even teenagers. The youngest volunteer is just 15 and comes from Bavaria. The war against France unites the Germans. Once again, Moltke surprises the enemy by rapidly deploying his forces. Part of the French troops is cut off around the city of Metz. Napoleon III rushes from Châlons to Metz to liberate the city. The two sides meet in battle near Sedan. Napoleon's forces are in a bad state. Difficult marches, indecisive leadership, and logistical problems have sapped their morale. The Emperor grants his soldiers a day of rest on the 1st of September. It was a fatal error. It gives the German forces time to surround the French troops. They're caught in a mousetrap, says Moltke. This time, the field marshal doesn't just bank on his rifles. Instead, he turns to his artillery. His plan is to use heavy artillery from the Krupp factories to decide the issue. In their improvised positions, the French are at the mercy of German firepower. They have almost no protection. Three volleys per minute, up to 800 on just this day. The French army falls apart under the barrage from the German artillery. Regiments, battalions, and even companies disintegrate. The Battle of Sedan is later romanticized as a German national legend. Napoleon III admits defeat in the afternoon of the 1st of September. He has a white flag hoisted above one of the fort's gates.
The Battle of Sedan is an incredible military success. Basically, the French Empire has been defeated on the battlefield. But on another level, it is also a very emotional, uplifting feeling for the majority of Germans. On this day at Sedan, the power that stood in the way of the Germans for so long was defeated.
Seit Jahrzehnten, so schien es jedenfalls, den Deutschen im Wege standen.
Napoleon III and 100,000 French soldiers are captured. The deposed emperor of the French dies in exile in England 3 years later. In Paris, news of the defeat sparks a rebellion. The empire has collapsed. But the war still goes on. The French capital is besieged by German troops and is bombarded with heavy artillery. This was to lead to deep rifts between the French and the Germans for decades to come. The siege of Paris is directed from nearby Versailles. The prefecture in the center of town becomes the Royal Prussian headquarters. It is also from here that the next steps for German unity are prepared. Bismarck intends to use the national euphoria after the victory at Sedan to motivate the South German states to join the North German Confederation voluntarily. But there's resistance. To overcome this, Bismarck writes a letter to the Bavarian king, Ludwig II. He knows the monarch balks at the idea of making his kingdom part of a unified Germany, which is what the majority of his subjects and his own government want. But he knows the king's weaknesses and plans to exploit them. Ludwig's fairy tale palaces? Who will pay for them? The answer is Bismarck, with a huge secret donation. Romantic fantasies in exchange for power. In return, the Bavarian king writes a letter that Bismarck has drafted. In the name of all the German princes, he offers Wilhelm, King of Prussia, the title of German Emperor. With Ludwig's letter in his hand, Bismarck has almost reached his goal. The proclamation of Wilhelm as German Emperor is to launch the unified German Empire.
German unification has been achieved, and we have an emperor.
Und der Kaiser auch.
But there's still one man whom he has to convince.
What is Ludwig thinking? My ancestors were satisfied with King of Prussia.
Your Majesty surely doesn't wish to remain a mere cipher in the new German Empire, to be just a sort of chairman.
If I declare myself willing to become emperor, I wish to have the title Emperor of Germany, definitely not German Emperor.
Your Majesty, the princes will never accept an emperor of Germany. They would fear that Your Majesty might want to rule alone without them.
Am I just to be a figurehead? The title of German Emperor is unacceptable.
Ist inakzeptabel.
Bismarck was always of the opinion that you have to use gentle formulations to push through tough policies. It wasn't about the title German Emperor. The word German is an adjective in this sense. But Emperor of Germany would mean I'm the boss of Germany, I give the orders. That was a different thing entirely. He wouldn't have got the South German princes on board, as they still had power of their own.
The palace of the French kings in Versailles, a 17th century Baroque masterpiece built to glorify the Sun King, Louis XIV. During the siege of Paris, it is used by the Germans. Wounded soldiers are nursed in the famous Hall of Mirrors. But on this day, they have to move out. In the land of their enemy, the Germans want to create what the French and the British have long achieved, a unified nation.
What's the situation? What does the king think now?
He still wants to be Emperor of Germany, nothing else.
Doesn't he grasp our situation? We're balancing on a knife's edge. Emperor of Germany is impossible. He must see that.
Even shortly before the proclamation, the question of the title still hasn't been solved. Will the Prussian king be proclaimed German emperor, as Bismarck and the princes would like, or Emperor of Germany, as Wilhelm is demanding? It all comes down to him, Frederick I, Grand Duke of Baden. He's to proclaim the new emperor.
Long live His Majesty Kaiser Wilhelm.
Frederick's shrewd phrasing avoids a rumpus. In the end, Wilhelm gives in to Bismarck and the princes. He becomes the Deutscher Kaiser, or German Emperor. The monarch's resentment is only temporary. He refuses to shake Bismarck's hand after the proclamation, but just 2 months later bestows on him the title of Prince. France capitulates shortly afterwards. Bismarck has achieved his goal of a Prussian-German nation-state. Germany is unified.
Bismarck's empire in 1871 is seen and experienced by almost all Germans as the culmination of German history. For decades, it offers what the majority of Germans most want: national unity and imperial splendor.
And size. The new German Empire now also includes southern Germany and the former French territories of Alsace and Lorraine. For its founder, Bismarck, the empire is complete. It doesn't need more territory. From now on, he wants to secure what has been achieved and preserve peace. His return to Berlin is triumphal. An eyewitness writes, "What makes anyone deserving of such divine grace as to be allowed to witness such great and powerful things?" When the victorious army enters the city through the Brandenburg Gate on the 16th of June 1871, Berlin is jubilant. The new empire fulfills many of the German people's desires: splendor, unity, and a degree of co-determination. The Reichstag, a German parliament representing the entire country, is elected in 1871. All men over the age of 25 are allowed to vote. At this point, politics is still purely for men. The new Reichstag, for which this building was later constructed, decides on the laws and the budget. But it's not Parliament that appoints the head of government, the Chancellor, but the Emperor. It's a constitution quite in the spirit of its author.
Bismarck gave the Germans a bit of democracy in that all adult men could vote for the Reichstag. That went even further than the model liberal monarchies such as Great Britain and Belgium. But the Germans didn't get an accountable government.
The founding of the empire triggers a rapid economic boom known as the Gründerjahre, the start-up years, we might say. The Berlin of the Margraves and Kings becomes a modern city. The population of the new German capital doubles by 1912 from 1 million to more than 2 million people. That makes Berlin the fourth largest city in the world, after London, New York and Paris. The city becomes the symbol of Germany's leap into modernity. Anything in the way of progress is removed. The engine behind this huge change in the whole country is the first German economic miracle. In the first 4 decades after the empire was founded, Germany's gross domestic product triples. The Industrial Revolution in Germany is sprinting ahead. By 1890, more Germans are working in industry than agriculture for the first time. This economic shift also has a political impact. A new self-confident class grows in the tenement blocks of Berlin and other cities. Organized labor. It's here that a new political force recruits its core voters. The Social Democrats don't just represent the social interests of the workers, but also a new idea of the state. They believe monarchy and aristocracy are the relics of bygone days. The future belongs to the workers. Bismarck considers these ideas high treason and subversion. He believes Social Democrats are all demagogues.
Open up in the name of the law.
Bismarck passes his anti-socialist laws to outlaw the party. Their meetings and newspapers are now illegal. Anyone who goes against these laws is threatened with fines and prison.
Take the Social Democrat away.
Daddy! Daddy!
You won't be seeing him anytime soon.
But it's not just Social Democrats who are facing persecution. The Catholic Church also comes under fire. "We're not going to Canossa," says Bismarck, a reference to the submission of an earlier emperor to the Pope.
Bismarck's politics looked for enemies within the empire, and that's one of its darker sides. He didn't just have his sights on the workers' movement, but also on Catholics and increasingly on national minorities within Prussia, and then on the Poles.
Bismarck plays a game of carrot and stick, introducing healthcare, accident and pension insurance in quick succession. These are milestones on the way to a welfare state, but they don't fulfill their intended purpose, which is to deprive the Social Democrats of their following. Despite the ban on the party itself, individual Social Democrats are allowed to vote and be elected. In 1881, they get 6% of the votes at the Reichstag elections. By 1890, the figure has risen to 20%. Bismarck's opponents have a majority in the new Reichstag. Domestically, the chancellor is finished. All his power now depends on one man's continuing good health. Under Wilhelm I, he has been Prussian Prime Minister for 26 years and Chancellor for 17 years. Bismarck's power is based on Wilhelm's faith in him. Under the Constitution, only the Kaiser can fire him.
It wasn't always easy being emperor under you.
Your Majesty was often harder to convince than the Austrians and even the French.
You now have to be at my grandson's side. He has the mental capacity, but little experience.
He's the man who will lead the dynasty into the future, Prince Wilhelm.
And he has very ambitious plans.
Prince Wilhelm's own father, the Crown Prince, is already terminally ill and will only survive the dying emperor by a few months. Within a year, the 90-year-old is succeeded by a 29-year-old. Wilhelm II is unwilling to be an emperor under Bismarck. "I'll give the old man 6 months, then I'll rule myself," he arrogantly declares. At the opening of the Reichstag by the new Kaiser, the painter places Bismarck in the center one more time. But he stands alone, isolated. The majority in Parliament is against him, and Wilhelm would prefer to rule alone. In March 1890, Bismarck is given his marching orders. He never forgives the new Kaiser for excluding him from power, despite all the honors Wilhelm lavishes on him.
Hypocrite. You'll ruin everything.
So his government ends as it began, fighting with the emperor. What remains of the empire's founder today?
Bismarck's
image remains ambivalent. He unified the Germans, but he also divided them. In 1871, he led them to the most glorious day in their history, but he quickly followed his successful foreign policy with dubious domestic policies.
After his dismissal, Bismarck withdraws to his country estate at Friedrichsruh near Hamburg. He will live there for 8 more years. His departure's seen as an end of an era, even outside Germany. A cartoon in the British satirical magazine Punch, Dropping the Pilot. It's farewell to the man who created unity out of opposing forces. Bismarck was a conservative who created the modern German nation-state. He achieved outward unification, but held internal unity back. His successors would gamble away the very empire he had built.